There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Well, hello, BookTube. Did you miss me? I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to another Friday Reads, 2 weeks after the last one. I took a Friday off last week so that I could actually finish some stuff. So I've got quite a bit to tell you and happy to be back. Don't worry, I'm not going to make a habit of this on a regular basis, but occasionally. It's good for me to just shake things up a bit. Keep everybody on their toes. So, lots to say. I don't know if it's been a good couple of weeks or a bad couple of weeks. I have no idea. Let's just get into things, shall we? I have 2 bales to tell you about, so that's good. The one is an audiobook that I had stopped listening to about 3 weeks ago, but just never got around to completely deciding whether I was going to bail on it or not until after my last Friday read. So yes, I have bailed on the British novel Animals by Emma Jane Unsworth, which I told you all some weeks ago that was reminding me of Ab Fab, Absolutely Fabulous, but yet I didn't hate it like I always hated Ab Fab. Well, I didn't end up hating it, and it didn't end up bugging me the way Ab Fab did, but I just got bored with the story. I could see where it was going. It was about 2 party girls. It was really well written, and I appreciated the humor, but the more we got into the story, the narrator, she was engaged to be married, and her husband didn't really like the really wild and crazy best friend that she was getting into all these shenanigans with, and it just started to feel really predictable, and I just lost interest. So I liked the writing. The story didn't hold my interest. I might try something else by her if it was a different kind of story, but that one is history. Much more surprisingly, this is the first dramatic bail of the year, I would say. And by the way, this is a Friday Reads film Thursday night because, yes, Kenji is still having trouble getting up in the morning, and to be honest, so am I. I'm usually waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning and not going back to sleep, or going back to sleep until noon, finally, from about 8 o'clock till noon. So I figure, yeah, let's get this Friday Reads filmed the night before. But I digress. 30% of the way in yesterday, I bailed on Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. This was the chunkiest book that I had been reading for Black History Month. And you will remember that I studied this in grad school, read half of it, ran out of time, never finished it. So toward that end, I got a new copy, nice hardcover copy of the book, and I had audiobook, and I did it as an audio text combo, and I not right off the bat, but eventually just hated it. I really hated this book. It's literary in that American novel tradition, modern novels. I'm thinking about like Catch-22 and those just American novels of that era, and I just hate the way they tell their stories, and they don't give me any characters to care about. And this was just, it started out brilliantly, and it's very powerful scene about this young protagonist who gets a scholarship from wherever he's from in the Deep South to go to a black college. But first, the white people of the town that are putting up the money for the scholarship subject all of the black boys to they're in their underwear or whatever, and they have to have a fight. Like just her demeaning, humiliating, just incredibly racist. And I mean, that scene was so powerful. And then we see him at university, and I told you a couple of weeks ago about the scene where he was driving the white trustee around, and they talked to the black man on the old slave yard part of the university grounds who had accidentally impregnated his wife and his daughter. That was a wild and crazy story that definitely was interesting, but then it just kept hopping from bizarre experience to bizarre experience with no characters threaded throughout, and the characters that he kept encountering were so crazy and so over the top, so histrionic, that I just stopped caring about anything. And I just felt like This novel was just a parade of allegorical characters that are meant to show various aspects of the African American experience in a way that just stopped working for me completely. I just felt bombarded with gargoylish characters that I didn't give a rat's ass about. And it seemed like the novel was going to continue along those veins. That, then our main character, the narrator, is going to walk around the corner and suddenly this strange person will come up and start screaming at him. And then in the next chapter, another new character that we'll never see again starts yelling and shouting his narrative at him. And I just... maybe part of it was the audio narrator had a really shouty voice and a really deranged tone of voice that was very effective, but it just put me off. I just hated this. I hated it. So, that happened. So those are my bails. I felt so liberated when I bailed on Invisible Man. It just was so rejuvenating. I recommend bailing very highly. There's nothing better. If you're feeling stuck in your reading life, bail on something. It's better than a facelift. So I've been breathing easier and having a much better time with everything since then. I have finished 3. Still not as many as I thought I would, but who cares? I'm having a good time. I'm reading some really good books, and most of them are not books to be read quickly. Shortly after my last Friday reads, I finished the Scottish novel Dougherty by William McIlvanney. I have done my due diligence with the pronunciation, but I keep forgetting it, and I have to keep going back to replay where he's introduced at a panel. McIlvanney, because I'd been mispronouncing it too. Dougherty by William McIlvanney. See, I've already forgotten it. I got to play it again. Might as well get it on the record here.
And that's back before it became the Costa, when it was less commercial, and a BAFTA. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the absolutely brilliant William McIlvanney.
William McIlvanney. I'm putting the stress on the wrong word. It's not how I would have thought it was pronounced. McIlvanney. I loved most of this. There was a couple things that bugged me, so I could only give it 4 stars, but it's probably one of the most positive 4-star reads. The things that I loved about it were so sublime and made such an impression on me. I've already filmed my full review, and you won't see it for a few weeks, but so I won't say too much here. Really wonderful character-driven novel about a working-class family from the early 20th century until just after World War I. And the characters were all larger than life. The men in the family, especially the father, Tam Dougherty, was just huge personalities, very angry, very loving people, all kinds of family conflict. The mother, Jenny, I absolutely loved her. In a nutshell, the problems I had with this novel were that he kept the characters apart too much, and he kept having long passages or full chapters where he was just focused on one character, and then we never saw that character interacting with the family very much for like 100 pages, and I don't like it when novelists do that, and to me it was a flaw, because the scenes where the family is all together, or where at least some of the characters are together, are the gold of this novel. And he had too many where he focused on the characters navel-gazing, and he did a poor job of that. Too many polysyllabic abstract nouns just throughout those passages that my eyes would glaze over. But then turn the page, and then some of the characters would be back together, and it was just magic. So I had a few problems, couldn't give it 5 stars, but the 4/5 of this book that I loved with all my heart. Stay tuned for my full review. I also finished this work of Canadian history, Western Canadian history, Liberalism, Surveillance and Resistance, Indigenous Communities in Western Canada, 1877 to 1927. Are You Still Awake? I mean, the title is just so boring. By Keith D. Smith. And the book was pretty boring too. I still gave it 4 stars because it contained the exact history that to match up with my deficit. I just didn't know how the government stole the land? Like, what was the mechanisms? What was the policies? What was the procedure? How did we wrest the land from the indigenous peoples? And this book goes in deep into the bureaucracy of the Indian Department, the Federal Indian Department in Canada, and focuses on communities in British Columbia and Alberta. I'm going to do a video. It's not going to be a review, but in the video I want to try to salvage the interesting parts of this story and just give you some detailed examples of how the land was taken, how we took the land. And I learned so much. So it ultimately was fascinating. The first half of the book I thought should have been 2 paragraphs and then get to the meat of it, which was the colonial, avaricious, mendacious way that we went about it. It's bureaucratic, not necessarily interesting, except that you have to keep reminding yourself every second paragraph, we're fucking stealing land that didn't belong to us, and we're doing it in the most boring but evil way possible. Stay tuned for my video about that. I'm really glad I read it. 4 stars. And just today, so since you last saw me on a Friday Reads, I have started and finished The Secret Lives of Church Ladies by Disha Philyaw. The only way I could get to this was to start doing it on audio, so most of it I did it on audio only. Wonderful audio narration. But I also today finished it up by reading it and listening to it together. I rated each story, and there were 9 stories. 5 of them were 5-star reads, and 4 of them were 4-star reads, so it still came up to a 5-star read. So I'm just being, putting all my data out there. As everybody and their dog knows, this is a book about black women, their sexuality, and the black church. I think I saw on Courtney Ferriter's review on Goodreads that a couple stories were connected. I missed that. So obviously when you only do it on audio, you miss certain things. The stories that worked the best for me were the ones that were very queer and kind of saucy and sassy. There were a couple where the protagonist was kind of the opposite of that. Innocent, inexperienced, kind of gullible and lonely, which didn't hold my interest as much. There was one story that I probably should have given that story less than a 4-star rating, to be honest, and that was because I kind of hated that one. That was Peach Cobbler, and I saw on the reviews some people that was their favorite one, but I thought Peach Cobbler was it was too simple. It was just about an evil mom abusing her daughter, and it just didn't have any nuance. There was a couple where I thought I wanted more nuance, but then the ones that had the nuance and the sassiness and the sauciness and that were like really hot, and most of them very queer, just vivaciously successful stories. So I am so enthusiastic about it. I'm excited about her, and 5 of these stories really excited me. So that's a great short story collection. I'm so glad I read it. And you should too. So that's what I've finished. I have started 3 new books. As I told you I would, I started Torrey Peters' 2021 novel, Detransition Baby, and I love it. I really love it. I am, maybe a third of the way in, and I'm finding it so fascinating. It's so smart and witty and emotionally compelling. It's everything. I think this is spellbinding. Some of you commented that the comparison that the author, Torrey Peters, and the pronouns for the transgender characters and the transgender author are all she. So let's put that out there so you don't think I'm making a mistake if I ever say she, because that's the pronouns in play here. And the main character is Reese, and she is a transgendered woman who, much like maybe the Sex and the City women, she's attracted to really screwed up relationships, and much like a lot of gay men that I know, kind of compulsive about sex and hooking up with dating apps and just being drawn to the most sordid activities imaginable and having a whale of a good time doing it, but wants love and had her heart broken many times, but one in particular was with Amy. And Amy was a transgendered woman, and they had a relationship that was more emotional than it was sexual, but Amy broke Reese's heart when Amy detransitioned and left her transgender life and identity behind. The only thing I'll say, I'm just checking what's on the synopsis, is that later that ex, who is now no longer Amy but Ames, contacts her, looks Reese up and says, would you like to help co-parent? Would you like to help mother the child that I've just fathered with my boss? And it goes from there. And that sounds like Sex in the City. And that could be just superficial drama, and it's not. So Tori Peters does a marvelous job of just taking you into the heart of the transgender experience, the transgender community. She's not judgy about the characters. I feel like I'm really getting to know them and understanding the complexity. That part of it is human complexity, human relationship complexity, overlaid with specific complexities that come out of transgender culture and psychology and life and relationships. It's just riveting. I'm going to do a full review if I can find the words. I will finish it, I think, in the next week or so. It's a Sean book because it's fascinating psychologically. I'm caring about the characters. It's funny and so smart. I don't know that I ever want to read a book about sexuality and romantic relationships that's not written by Tori Peters from here on in. Let's move on to something completely different. I am reading a novel that was originally published in 1946. This is one of the furrowed middlebrow books from Dean Street Press. The Late Mrs Priolo by Monica Tyndall. As I said, originally published in 1946. Monica Tyndall is the sister-in-law of Ursula Orange. I have read and reviewed a couple of her books, which I absolutely loved, and this is her sister-in-law. So this is the aunt of Gillian Tyndall, who is a British writer still working and writing today, and Gillian Tyndall, who is Ursula Orange's daughter, has written the introduction. I haven't read the introduction. I don't want any spoilers, so I will read it after. But this novel, which is a buddy read with Leah from Calgary, is starting out really good. I just got a bare start on it a few days ago, and we'll be checking in on the first half of it. I think, Leah, our check-in day's on Sunday, isn't it? It's a very different type of novel than the two by Ursula Orange that I've read, but it grabbed my interest from the first chapter. So the protagonist is never met her mother-in-law, and her mother-in-law died early in her marriage to Henry. And Henry was estranged from his mother, and so they go back for the funeral. Well, the body isn't quite yet cold in the bed, and she meets Henry's brother and two sisters that Henry has been quite distant from. So there's a lot of estrangement and strange personalities in the family. And Mrs. Priolo seemed to be one of the least well-loved people in Britain when she died. It's kind of mysterious as to why, what happened. That's all I know so far. It is quite smart and I wouldn't say funny, but there's some wit in it that I'm enjoying, and that's all I can say so far. I've only read 22 pages. It's a 184-page novel, so I'll have a lot more to say about it. Probably not next Friday, but shortly thereafter. And after I bailed on The Invisible Man, I immediately picked up my choice for the Colombian book that I'm reading for Invisible Cities, and that is Fish Soup by Margarita Garcia Robeo, translated by Charlotte Coombs. And it's starting out really good. I'm only 16 pages into it, and as I said before, it is a collection of 2 novellas and a book of short stories. I think I had mistakenly said that there was essays in here, but no. 2 novellas and a collection of short stories. So I am 16 pages into the first novella, which is called Waiting for a Hurricane, and it is wild and fascinating. I think I want to read you the opening paragraph. This couldn't be more different from the gargoylish drudgery of Invisible Man. Living by the sea is both good and bad for exactly the same reason. The world ends at the horizon. That is, the world never ends, and you always expect too much. At first, you hope everything you're waiting for will arrive one day on a boat. Then you realize nothing's going to arrive, and you'll have to go looking for it instead. I hated my city because it was both really beautiful and really ugly, and I was somewhere in the middle. The middle was the worst place to be. Hardly anyone made it out of the middle. It was where the lost causes lived. There, nobody was poor enough to resign themselves to being poor forever, so they spent their lives trying to move up in the world and liberate themselves. When all attempts failed, as they usually did, their self-awareness disappeared, and that's when all was lost. My family, for example, had no self-awareness whatsoever. They'd found ways of fleeing reality, of seeing things from a long way off, looking down on it all from their castle in the sky. And most of the time, it worked. And it goes from there. I'm really enjoying it. It's too early to say very much about it, but fish soup is much better than Invisible Man soup. So those are what I have started, and I have 9 days left of reading after this Friday Reads goes live. I've got some chunky books that I'm still working my way through, so I'm not going to start too much more, but I am going to try to fit 2 more from my Black History Month TBR. Luster by Raven Leilani, only because I have it on audio, so it's one that I could do most or all of on audio, and I would have time to do that when I'm out and about, since I finished the audiobook of Church Ladies today. And then I think I'm going to ignore all the men on my TBR, and I'm going directly to Tony Cade Bambera, Gorilla My Love. This is a short story collection, and it's short, 180 pages. I have been curious about Tony Cade Bambera for years. I can't even remember what I heard about her that aroused my curiosity, but it's time, boys and girls, it's time. So I plan to fit this in by the end of the month. So I will have started this before you see me next on my Friday Reads. Last night I posted a fabulous, it's long, but boy is it worth your time, fabulous Zoom chat with Ronan Hession and Covery Mataban, 2 Irish novelists recommending Irish lit to read for the Irish Readathon. So please check that out, because boy, the recommendations they gave were fabulous. And I will be posting my own Irish Readathon TBR before next Friday. It's going to be more of a pile of possibilities, because I posted an incredible TBR for Black History Month and I only got to, maybe 35% of it. So, but I'm still going to post it, because maybe my TBR will give you ideas of what you might read, even if I don't get to them. But I hope to get to quite a few of them. But I do want to be a little more realistic about what I might get to in March. All right, I am nattering away. Probably most of you have already turned the video off, so it's time for me to turn the video off, and thank you very much for watching.